All right, well, let's get into an in-depth discussion now on that, what you saw, and indeed other related matters. And joining me in studio is former president of the South African nation, Kgalema Motlanthe, who doubles up as the former deputy president of the ANC and currently the chair of the party's electoral committee. Mr. President, good evening to you.
Good evening,
thank you for your time.
Good evening to Newzroom viewers.
It's good to have you here, Mr. President. I want to start this conversation. We'll go back to the admonishing moment you had there in Soweto. Yeah. I want to start with the 28th anniversary of the adoption of South Africa's constitution. That is what we're going to be marking this year.
Okay.
And one of the architects or drafters of this constitution, Vale Musa, writing in the Sunday Times today that, and I quote, "It is the standard we expect those in political and economic power to respect." Latching on those words, how do you think successive ANC administrations have fared in respecting the supreme law of the land?
Well, the supreme law of the land is recognized and accepted by ANC leaders who are in government as well. However, you know, we are aware that when Chief Justice Mogoeng found that the former President Jacob Zuma had failed to defend, uphold, and promote the Constitution in accordance with the oath of office, he equally found that Parliament had failed in its responsibilities. So the fact that you know, such pronouncements can be made against institutions and the head of state indicates the strength of the Constitution. Yeah.
I want to still harp on that article by Vale Musa because he calls it a weapon for the poor, the weak, and the disadvantaged. And so the next question is, how reliable a tool, an instrument, has it been, do you think, for the downtrodden to assert their rights?
Well, you know, the rights enshrined in the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, are important to all citizens of South Africa, all sectors basically. However, access to those rights is itself a function of agency. So you'd have specialized, you know, agencies. You'll have sectoral agencies. You'll have civic society itself. That is why we need an active citizenry to access those rights, because you know, jurisprudence itself evolves and develops as and when these rights and legislations are tested. Yeah. So and I think in that regard, we are in you know, moving in the right direction, so to speak, because you need noisy South Africans. You need South Africans who don't accept to be treated shabily. You need South Africans who demand their rights. Of course, some go overboard, you know, and create rights that don't exist and demand them. But here I'm referring to the role and centrality of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in protecting all South African citizens.
I'm glad you say that, Mr. President, because I want to touch on next to the apartheid era crimes, specifically the ones that were referred to the prosecuting authority for prosecution. And that process, I'm sure you'll agree, was a seminal moment for the country in order to bring about this reconciliation that Madiba so yearned for. And so, as a former head of state, I'd like to know this from you. Were you aware of a decision by the executive of adopting a policy position between the years 2003 and 2017 not to pursue TRC recommended apartheid-era crimes, as the Supreme Court of Appeal put it in its landmark judgment of 2021?
Well, no, I'm not aware of that. Because you see, if you say policy, then it has to be recorded in a minute of cabinet. In other words, it's a decision taken by cabinet. It's not a remark here or there by individuals. Then it becomes state policy. And I'm not aware of that at all. All I remember, the short stint I spent in government, we had to deal with the large numbers of people who qualified for amnesty, some of whom were, still affected by criminal records in terms of, having been convicted in the past. But the offenses were offenses that were part of the struggle against apartheid. So there was a large number of people whose cases had to be processed. There was an ad hoc committee of parliament made up of all parties in parliament, which had to process that. And that's what I'm aware of,
Yeah. If you're just joining us, a very good evening to you. Welcome. And we are in conversation with the former head of state, Kgalema Motlanthe, and discussing state matters for the moment. Mr. President, we're still discussing whether or not there was a deliberate decision taken by the government, the ANC-led government, not to pursue prosecutions that were recommended by the TRC. Now, you've stated that you're not aware of that because if there was such a decision, it would have been recorded in cabinet minutes. However, two courts have come to the same conclusion. In your mind, surely that should tell us something.
Well, I would agree, Oli, that those who were aggrieved because loved ones and relatives were eliminated during the course of apartheid, repression, and the TRC process actually did not receive any confessions, because remember, to qualify for amnesty, perpetrators had to tell the whole truth to the TRC. And that's why the TRC had a subcommittee dealing with amnesty. Yes. So those who failed to made any such representations and confessed their evil deeds were then identified by the TRC as perpetrators, and they had to face the full might of the law. Now, to the extent that such cases never came before the courts for a long, long time, that is why the courts are finding that, no, this was an injustice. Because, you see, there's a whole gamut of such cases. Some people, needed reparation. And I recall very vaguely that a certain amount was set aside for reparations.
Yes.
Yes. And I remember in my previous life, I used to interact with Kulumani and other affected, communities and relatives of victims of apartheid brutality. So what I'm saying is, it's a case of justice delayed being, tantamount to justice being denied.
Yes.
Yes. The delays are regrettable. It should never have happened. I mean, I know of, for instance, I used to interact with, the widows of the Craddock Four. Yeah.
The former TRC commissioner, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, was subsequently appointed by the NPA on the back of these judgments to investigate whether there was political interference in whether or not the prosecuting authorities should pursue these cases. And in his report, he called for an independent judicial commission of inquiry into the matter. Knowing what we know today, would you support that there be a judicial inquiry into this matter?
Well, any step that would clear the air and ensure that justice is eventually seen to have been done have to be supported. I would support such a step, yeah.
I want to move on to a matter that now talks directly to you having been head of state at a time.
Yeah.
One of those moments was the firing of Vusi Pikoli. You were the person that sealed his fate.
Yeah.
And in summary of that decision, in a sense, you said that Pikoli lacked professional competence. With the benefit of hindsight, do you have any regrets about that particular decision?
No, not at all, Xoli, because, Vusi Pikoli is the only director of public prosecutions whose severance from service followed the letter and, law of the law to the end. All others, either they received an offer to leave and they left. But with Vusi Pikoli, by the time I got into office, okay, let me take one step back. The law which applies to the Director of Public Prosecutions is identical to the provisions of the law for the dismissal of a judge, word for word. So you have to follow the same procedures. In other words, so the president has to establish a committee which should look into the matter and produce a report which serves as advice to the president. And the president himself has no authority to dismiss a director of public prosecutions. You set these processes in motion, then you have to write, and then there are representations, from the affected party through the lawyers, and you look at that. And then you have to compile a report which you send to Parliament with clear recommendations. And it's Parliament which, upon deliberating over that report, then takes a final decision. That's how it's done legally.
And so all those
all those steps were followed. And Pikoli, through his lawyers, then said he's appealing. So he went to court. And then, of course, there was change in government. And I recall asking the then Minister of Justice, when I was no longer head of state, as to what happened to that case. Because, in other words, this case was handled by 3 presidents.
Indeed.
Yeah. So when I inquired, the response I got was that no, he got a settlement and withdrew the case from the courts. Mm. Yeah.
The reason I bring up this case is that Pikoli said at the inquiry that his suspension, because where you come in is at a late stage.
Yeah.
He's put on suspension by former President Mbeki. And this is for what he says was his pursuit of the then Commissioner of the Police, Jackie Selebi, for corruption. Fast forward to July of 2010, and Jackie Selebi is ultimately found guilty of corruption. And it is on that basis that I ask you this question, because in a way, does it not vindicate Vusi Pikoli's pursuit of the late Commissioner of the Police?
Well, that's a separate matter, Koli.
Yes.
Quite honestly, I mean, it's got nothing to do with the processes of, severing the services of a public director, rather a director of public prosecutions. That's a separate procedure. As to what triggered his suspension, that's a separate matter. Yeah.
I'd like us to move on, therefore, to ANC matters.
Okay.
ANC renewal it's become a lexicon that we are now all familiar with in the country. You are the head of the electoral committee of the ANC, which is tasked with selecting candidates that are either going to be sent to parliament or public office, whatever position they may eventually occupy. What can you tell us about the quality versus quantity as you make your selection process?
Well, as the electoral committee, we had to interview those who were nominated to serve as public representatives. More than 1,000 of them. Of course, in each province we had established, a provincial list committee. So the PLCs interviewed those who were nominated to be on the province-to-province list and province-to-national list. As the electoral committee, we had to interview the 300 nominees for the national-to-national list. All of them were interviewed. And the criteria sought to improve on the caliber and quality of those who would serve as public representatives of the ANC. So you look at qualifications, you look at understanding of the importance of the Constitution, the Constitution of the Republic vis-a-vis the Constitution of the party, because the Constitution of the ANC, in the section that deals with objectives or object of why the organization exists, are in sync with the Constitution of the Republic. However, the relationship between the Constitution of the ANC and the Constitution of the Republic is not addressed in very clear, explicit terms. The only provision found in the ANC Constitution is the directive that, or the rule that says, in each legislature, a caucus of the ANC must be established. and that the decisions of that caucus are binding on ANC public representatives. So, proceeding from that understanding and the oath that each member of the legislature or the parliament takes or affirms, there shouldn't be a contradiction between those two.
Do you find that?
Well, one of the reasons why Mogoeng found Parliament to have failed in its responsibilities was precisely because the caucus took a decision which trumped, sorry to use the word, which was as though it is preeminent over the Constitution of the Republic, or the oath that they would have taken, you see. So that's one of the tests that we had to introduce in the interviews so that there's clarity going forward.
Because ANC members seemed to think that following the party line trumped the Constitution or constitutional obligations. When we talk constitutional obligations, we're talking now the country, and that's why oftentimes you would have heard, I think, during that period that the ANC comes first before the public. Is that what you are telling us? That
yes.
In a way, ANC members seemed to have difficulty separating this?
It's confusion arising from the Electoral Act. Remember, the Electoral Act is proportional representation. It's political parties which contest elections. And thereafter, following its own internal processes, parties then come up with lists that then, take up the seats allocated to each party. Now, that causes confusion because in the individuals. So it's as though the oath that they take to become public representatives and to pledge, faithfulness to the Republic and the laws is a fiction, or the constitution of the party which provides for caucus decisions, being binding on these individual members. And it's a simple issue, but very complex.
Yes.
Simple in the sense that if you understand that the oath that you take to become a public representative trumps, because it's based on the Constitution, every other thing is secondary, cannot be preeminent over the Constitution. If you understand that, then you will also understand that your discussions and debates in the caucus cannot knowingly and deliberately go against the oath you've taken.
You watching the conversation between myself and the former leader of the country, and indeed former deputy president of the ANC. And at this moment, we are discussing matters to do with the party that he serves, the ANC. Mr. President, as chair of the ANC's electoral committee, you have to do these rigorous interviews, as you were telling us earlier, in order to select the best of the best.
Yeah.
There are those who believe that the ANC literally runs out of road in its attempt to select upstanding members of the party versus those that are tainted. What are you finding?
No. We remember the nominations come from branches. And we then had to conduct the interviews on all of those nominees. And taking into account their CVs, their qualifications, their standing in society, their age, their demographics, gender, taking all of those into account, we then order the list. Remember, we interviewed 300 nominees for 200 seats if we were to, wipe the floor with other parties. The seats that are available are 200, but we interview 300 because you need the reserves to be to have gone through the same process and so on. So then, of course, there are those who the integrity or who have allegations leveled against them and so on. And the ANC's approach was that those, for instance, who are like facing any allegations should present themselves to the Integrity Commission of the ANC. And the Integrity Commission then produces a report or its findings, which it submits to the Secretary General as recommendation to the National Executive Committee, because as it stands now, the Integrity Commission has no original authority to make final decisions. The final decision is that of the National Executive Committee. So they submit recommendations to the National Executive Committee.
Yes.
Now, the National Executive Committee, if it delays in processing the reports or doesn't take positions one way or the other, we have no basis of identifying any individual to disqualify them.
Yes.
Yeah. For the ANC's elective conference, we had actually disqualified people because there the rules that were accepted by the National Executive Committee and had to be implemented by the Electoral Committee gave us the authority to disqualify people who we thought were tainted. But of course, at the elective conference itself, the matter was then referred to the steering committee of conference, which steering committee came back and said, no, they should be on the ballot paper. And that's how they ended up on the ballot paper. So for Parliament now, we just had to, order the list on the basis of the criteria that we follow. And that's what we were able to do.
So without mentioning names, people's names, in the current list that's been approved for those that are going to go to Parliament, are there still the names of those that were recommended for further action by the State Capture Commission of Inquiry? Are those people
Yeah, there
included?
are some. There are some.
Why is that?
There are some precisely because if there's no finality, we can't act. You see, it's not our province. I mean, we don't have the authority to do that. That's why I was explaining to you that the authority rests with the National Executive Committee. And so all we had to do, I mean, in ordering the lists was to ensure that we improve on quality and so on, and that there's representativity. And then, of course, we have to retain some experience and skills. Remember, the portfolio committees in Parliament, in the past, I mean, speaking for the ANC, people were allocated to portfolio committees almost randomly. So what we have insisted upon now is that if you're a qualified water engineer, you must be in the portfolio committee that deals with water. That qualification and experience is needed there. So those are the steps that part of this process now. Now, many people say, well, you have these people, the Zondo Commission fingered them and so on. And as I said, the ANC itself took a decision that no, they must present themselves to the Integrity Commission. Now, the general populace, the attitude is, these have been fingered, exclude them. That's the general attitude. But you see, some of those affected people would say, no, they are taking the section that deals with them on review. That's process, you see. And until that process reaches finality and there's a determination, as an electoral committee, we have absolutely no basis to do anything about that here.
It seems a losing battle.
No, certainly not. Yeah.
I want to go back to one of the words you once used, or a word you once used, and that is that the most incorrigible deserve to be kicked out of the ANC. Do you believe that that is where the former president, Jacob Zuma, is right now in terms of his life in the ANC?
No. The former president, Jacob Zuma, like all of us, has made his choices. And that's, what defines him. So when I refer to how we were taught to understand the meaning of the word incorrigible, was that if stones are cooked in this pot and you are cooked in the same pot, the stones are ripe and ready for eating before you. Then the ANC has to wash its hands on you. That, because the ANC prides itself with having abiding patience and capability to form, reform, and mold upright members. And so when it abandons you, when it washes its hands, it means you are incorrigible. It means the stones get, well cooked before you. And
so at this point, he's not there.
Well, as I said, he's made this choice because you see, he says some strange things, like he does not support Ramaphosa's ANC. Now, there is no such organization. We all found this organization in existence. It was passed on to us by those who came before us. We will leave it behind. And so, because you see, when he says this is Ramaphosa's ANC, it also is a confession that probably when he was president, that's how he understood the ANC to be his ANC, you see, and must have acted with that understanding that it is his ANC, which is what, chattel property, personal fiefdom, what is it? It's no such thing.
You watching News at Prime, and as you hear in the background, the former president still explaining why it is that the ANC has not and most probably will not abandon its former president, despite the many things that he has said, which you find, as you say, quote unquote, strange. Does that mean that the ANC will stick by Zuma?
No.
Even after
it doesn't
the disciplinary process?
No, it doesn't mean any such thing. That's why he's been subjected to disciplinary procedures, because he's stepped on the wrong side of the ANC's constitution. So until that process is concluded one way or the other, we will then be able to know what the next step is. Yeah. For now, that's where we are. The Secretary General says the hearing is now postponed to after the elections. We'll see what that gives, you see.
It's very interesting because for a South African, an ordinary South African, I'm now going back to the Soweto old lady who admonished you this past weekend, saying you must respect the people who have put you in the position in which the ANC is. For that Gogo, I don't pretend to speak for her, but I can speak as a South African and say, it is strange that the ANC would see it fit to discipline its own purely on the basis that they are in violation of the ANC's constitution, Rule 25. Whereas we now know today that state capture was a phenomenon that took place in South Africa. Should that not have been the moment the ANC instituted disciplinary proceedings against former President Zuma?
Well, the state capture is handled by, or the consequences thereof are handled by government and its institutions. So remember, the NPA had access to those records. So if the NPA finds that it's got substantive cases against the various individuals, it will then institute proceedings. And once that happens, the ANC rule on step aside kicks in forthwith.
But Mr. President, what you are suggesting now, in fact, what you are dismissing, is the billion rand that went to this commission of inquiry, which the ANC supported, by the way.
How am I
you are saying that?
How am I dismissing it?
You're dismissing it because you're saying that despite its findings that there was state capture, never mind that court processes possibly have got to take place in order to find people either guilty or innocent, but there was the phenomenon of repurposing the state for certain individuals to benefit out of state coffers. Is that not egregious? Looking back at how we started this conversation around the Constitution.
Well, I can understand where your problem emanates from. Your problem is that, you see, words must mean what we want them to mean. They must carry their day-to-day meanings, so that our conversation become, meaningful. So, the state capture report makes certain findings which are allegations against individuals. And those individuals have to be afforded just and fair procedures in terms of whether they are being charged or not, you see. And that's why some of them say, no, we're taking this on review because there's no substance in the allegations against me and so on.
Mr. President, can I interrupt you?
Interrupt me, please.
Please allow me.
Yes, thank you.
You're saying these individuals must be afforded the process to either clear their names and so forth. The problem here is that you have a former head of state who refused to do exactly that, afforded that opportunity. It is precisely the reason he ended up in jail for 15 months.
Agreed.
Am I correct?
Agreed, correct.
So at which point does the former president have to show you his true colors in order for you to say that perhaps we were wrong as a party to even consider this individual for the position of president? Does the ANC maybe think that market work?
Well. You see, the difficulty here is that you are basically saying, does the ANC regret ever electing President Zuma into a position of responsibility? You'll find responses to that.
What is your response?
Well, my response is that he was democratically elected to lead the ANC by the ANC processes. That's what happened. Of course, his actions speak for themselves. They are wrong. He's taken wrong actions, he's made wrong choices, and the jury will come back with a clear verdict on that. But the point I'm trying to convey to you, Kgali, is that it's not helpful to rely on hindsight to make determinations, because hindsight is perfect science. At that point, this was the man, and this man was given the responsibilities. And to the extent that he messed up, that's what history will say. That's what the history will say. But you see, we relate to history as follows, Kgali. We draw lessons from history in order to deal with problems of today in a manner which lays the foundation for the future.
Final question.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
I apologize.
Okay.
I apologize for stepping in.
Thank you.
Exactly on what you're saying.
Yeah.
I would like to conclude the conversation on this point.
Mm-hmm.
If the ANC is no longer a candidate for quote-unquote shock therapy, as you once suggested,
Yeah.
that it should be kicked out of power, perhaps for 5 years, people will be wondering, exactly on the basis of one of its leaders that we have just discussed, and the many statements we've made back and forth here, people will be wondering, what has changed about the conduct of the ANC for them to put it back into power? My final question to you for the night.
Well, thanks to the establishment of MK Party, the process of renewing the ANC has really received a great impetus in that regard, because, you know, I think the ANC was going to struggle and take a long time to, you know, rid itself of elements who act contrary to the mores, the values, and the rules of the ANC.
And that's where we are going to leave it for tonight.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time.
I'm hoping that we leave this on the note to be continued.
I'd love for that to happen.
Well, I'm hoping against hope that that's...
I'm hoping that that is going to happen, because time is the enemy here. We could have gone on. But I'm truly appreciative of your time and you joining us in studio in the midst of this campaign process that is underway.
You know that old lady who was admonishing me?
Yes.
Her husband pulled out a photo, an old photo. They are from Alexander Township originally, from an old photo of former Deputy Minister Joan Motlanthe, who was Minister of Intelligence, because they grew up together in Alexander Township. So they are ANC, actually. And then he also pulled out a photo of Makotani when she turned 100 years, because she lived in Deep Loop, not far from that family's home. Yeah. So the husband was eager for us to reminisce, you know, and so about good times and so. But the old lady was waiting to empty herself here. So we just had to submit to that here. Because she asked, the first question she put to me was that, Kgalema, le batlang mo? What do you want? And I wasn't going to say, no, we are here to ask for your vote. I said, no, we are here for your blessings and guidance. Yeah.
And so her words to you was,
yeah,
if that is what you are seeking, then
yeah,
you've got to respect the people.
No, she was saying, the way you people are governing, you don't show respect to the people. So you must respect the people. And so it was fine. I mean, I was happy to just absorb that because I knew exactly where she was coming from.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that was the conversation with former President Kgalema Motlanthe, and yeah, hopefully to be continued. Up next is In Focus. We shall see you tomorrow.